Hello and welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss about the problems of urban decline, patterns of trade. Before we discuss the topic, let me briefly tell you about the objectives. In this very topic, our goal is to develop an understanding about the changes witnessed in terms of patterns of trade, currency and urban settlements. Though the changes in these spheres overhauled every aspect of political, social, economic, and cultural life, but the most severe impact was witnessed in terms of economy. Decline in trade, both internal and external, that resulted in the dearth of currency, and finally, both the problems culminated into the decay of urban settlements. Such issues became the prominent features of the India economy and defined the economic scenario of India in the Gupta and in the post-Gupta period. In this lecture, our initiative is to understand the nature of these changes and comprehend India's shift towards early medieval times. As discussed in the previous lecture, the Gupta period saw the beginning of a number of significant changes. These modifications, both during the Gupta and post-Gupta eras, signal the start of a new era in the Indian history. According to historians, ancient era of Indian history has finally come to an end, and the time between the 6th and 8th centuries roughly can be considered as the start of early medieval era. It wasn't just a matter of switching over to a new governing dynasty or simply switching from an imperial power like the Guptas to the emergence of various minor local states. This transformation offered many domains of change in the different aspects of life, such as the economy, social, and religious ones. We will talk about how economy changed and impacted on the urbanization and commercial affairs roughly from the middle of the first millennium CE. We will also examine how, on the one hand, this time period has been characterized by deterioration and desertion, while on the other, why and how a different group of historians attributes this time period to tremendous vitality. But first, we will try to see what is trade and urbanization. Trade is the commercial transition of buying and selling goods and services in domestic or foreign marketplaces. This covers the manner of exchange, manufacturing, transportation, safety, and security. Many people are involved in this process directly or indirectly, including traders, merchants, artisans, and peasants as well. Since taxes on goods sold by political authority are a significant source of income for the state, therefore, everyone has a stake in it. On the other hand, urbanization is a sociological process that causes societies to become more urban in nature, while on the other hand, it is a process of urban growth that results in the rise and growth of towns and cities. In other words, urbanization is seen as the outcome of societal transformation where specific economic and social systems are visible. The two processes are mutually linked since trade was a significant and prevalent activity in towns and cities from the remote past. Trade thus plays a significant role in economic history and is closely related to the process of urbanization. Now we will be talking about the problems of urban decline. International trade between China and Mediterranean world through the Indian subcontinent and trans-Eurasian routes had begun in ancient India much before the Common Era. The Silk Road, which linked China to Byzantium and then Europe, traveled through the entirety of Central Asia. The route was renowned for transporting not just goods but also concepts, ideologies, cultural norms, and other elements that changed people's lives and the socio-political landscape of the globe as well. When there was unrest in Central Asia, traders and merchants traveled to India to find safer land routes and sea routes as well as to buy Indian goods. The loss of trade with the West became obvious with the fall of the Byzantine Empire in the 4th century CE, which had a significant influence on the Indian economy. When Romans discovered how to make silk from the Chinese, the volume of Indo-Roman trade was significantly diminished. As a result, India lost the silk trade that had brought her a significant quantity of gold in the early centuries of the Christian era. The Arab monopoly over the trade routes in and around the Red Sea and Arabian Sea, as well as the expansion of power on the northwestern frontiers of India between the 6th and 7th centuries, were other factors that contributed to the decrease of international Indian trade. Due to the presence of Arabs in those areas, overland travel became dangerous for Indian traders. According to tale told in the Katha Sarita Sagar, a group of merchants traveling from Ujjain to Peshawar were kidnapped and sold by some Arabians. When they eventually gained their freedom, they made the decision to leave the northwest region forever and relocated in South India where they continued their trade. In parallel, a quadrangular conflict for the control of Central Asia trade routes emerged between the Arabs, Turks, Tibetans, and Chinese between 650 and 750 CE. The merchants looked and developed alternate trade routes through Assam, Sikkim, and Burma due to the turbulent conditions on the route through northwest India and Central Asia. When the Arabs raided Bhuj and Thana in the 7th century, devastated Wallaby, a significant port on the Saurashtra coast in the 8th century, even the western coast of India experienced interruption and dislocation in maritime trade. Even if Arabs were crucial to the expansion of Indian marine trade after the 10th century, initially their sea raids had terrible effect on the Indian commercial activities. During this time, trade with China and Southeast Asia was likewise not healthy. No pottery, coinage, or other artifacts have been found to suggest that trade with Southeast Asia was of a significant kind. Even such trade relations are not documented beyond the 4th century CE. India had previously conducted business with several Southeast Asian nations in beads and a few other goods. Though Indian delegation was sent to China in order to revive the trade relations, but it did not prove very useful. The quantity of these expeditions has decreased since the 6th century. Aside from that, the alleged Chinese coins and Selden proclaim from Tamil Nadu are dated to the 9th century or later, and before that there is no evidence of any Indo-China trade at all. Foreign commerce was not the only area of trade decline. Due to the deterioration of connections between coastal towns and inland towns, as well as between towns and villages, long distance internal trade also suffered. The loss of trade, urban commodity, output shrinking, and town deterioration were all related issues. The declining social status of merchants and traders during this time period is a sign of the failings of trade and commerce. Trade was negatively impacted by the emergence of numerous self-sufficient entities headed by landed beneficiaries. In fact, a later book called the Katha Sarita Sagar hypothesized that traders traveled through forests to avoid paying several duties that caused much distress to merchants and compelled them to think for alternative professions. Long distance and maritime travel was forbidden by religious sculptures and priestly class by declaring traveling by means of sea a sin. Such attitude surely was against the development of trade and trade relations. The process of decline in trade from Gupta period onwards started because the overall economy became agrarian in nature. The crucial element that played a role in this direction was the system of land grants, which grew in number in the Gupta and especially in the post-Gupta period. Even graded state officials such as Mahamandaleshwara, Mandalika, Samanta, Mahasamanta, Thokra, etc., developed interest in land. However, they were different from the actual tiller of the soil and lived on the surplus extracted from the peasants who were hardly left with anything to trade. These land grants were different from the earlier ones. During the Satavahana times, only the revenue of the land was granted, but during the Gupta period, not only the revenue from the donated land were transferred to the donis, but right over mines and minerals were also granted. The donated villages or donated lands were exempted from the interference of soldiers and royal officials. Gradually, rights to punish all offences against family, private property, and person were transferred along with the privileges. Earlier in the Mauryan period, the state officials were paid in cash. Now they were being paid through grants of land. The large number of grants enjoyed by landed intermediaries resulted in the emergence of a self-sufficient, closed and immobile village community. The condition of the actual tillers of the soil declined. It resulted in the growth of rural economy while local needs were being satisfied locally through the imposition of numerous restrictions on the mobility of actual producers. The cultivators were tied to the land and were handed over to the doni along with the land. This practice began in Central India, Odisha, and Gujarat in the 6th century. Not only the peasantry but artisans and merchant communities were forced to give their profession and tied down to their habitation to serve the local clienteles and masters. Though there was fall in commercial activity but not a total end. Between 4th to 8th centuries, trade in expensive and opulent commodities intended for kings, feudal chiefs, and heads of temples and monasteries persisted. Although items like valuable and semi-precious stones, ivory, horses, silk, etc. played a significant role in long-distance trade, but the sources from this time period provide very least evidence of transactions involving things used on a daily basis. The only essential items mentioned in the inscriptions are salt and oil, which were imported because they could not be produced locally by every village. The reference to commerce in cereals, sugar, textiles, handicrafts, etc. would have been more common if the economy had not been self-sufficient. In other words, the nature of trade was such that it primarily served landed middlemen and feudal lords rather than the general populace. Even though there were some centers of trade and commerce, while traders from all over the world gathered to conduct business, such as Phuha near Karnal in Haryana and Ahar near Bulandshahr in Uttar Pradesh, they were unable to significantly impact restricted economy of the country as whole. Eventually, India's long distance overseas trade revived only after 1000 CE, and in this direction, Arab merchants played a great role. So, now we will be talking about the urban settlements. Decay of urban settlement is an important indicator of commercial decline because the towns are primarily the settlements of people who are specialized in some engaged crafts and commerce. With the decline of trade, the demand for craft goods slumped. The traders and craftsmen living in towns were compelled by their circumstances to disperse to rural areas for alternative means of survival. Thus, with the decline of town life, town folk became a part of village economy. It resulted into the rapid ruralization of economy. Ruralization is explained by many scholars in terms of the decline in craft, commerce and urban centers. Thus, one important feature of the post-Gupta period economy was the decline in trade, both internal and external, that finally carried the process of urban decay. As the flourishing Roman trade and the trade with Central Asia and Southeast Asia received a massive setback, and the decline became more pronounced by the middle of the 6th century CE. The inflow of Roman gold coins into India stopped after the early century of the Common Era. At the same time, India witnessed onslaught of the Hunnas, and this invasion ushered in the death of remaining contacts with Central Asia and West Asia. Other factors such as the decentralization of political authority after the Guptas, dispersal of power among local chiefs, religious and secular grants, and rise of intermediary landlords who imposed high taxes served to dampen the enthusiasm of traders and merchants and led to a decline in trading activities. Frequent political wars also discouraged commercial activities during this phase. The process of decaying towns form an important discussion in the Hyun Song's account Suyuki. Varamihara's Brihat Samhita, compiled during 6th century, talks about the destruction of towns and cities, and there are few Puranas that indicate the depopulation of important cities as Kali Yoga. Moreover, post-Gupta literature such as Kutani Matam of Damodar Gupta 7th century, mainly talks about the villages and village life, while details about urban life have been given no attention at all. Eventually, the cities and towns that were earlier famous as commercial centers were either turned into politico-military centers or as pilgrimage centers. The process of deurbanization and the emergence of ruralization is also visible in the changing of urban oriented names to rural. For instance, changes are noticed in the meaning of certain terms like Sirini, which earlier stood for guilds, came to mean caste, and Nigama came to mean village. Besides, archaeologists have carried numerous excavations at numerous places that also revealed the story of urban decay during the period under study. The archaeological studies revealed that some of the important towns such as Patliputra, Kashi, Vishali decayed that became evident from the poverty of structure and antiquities. The pan-Indian decline of urbanization is marked by desertion of urban centers between the 3rd and 8th centuries. Even those settlements which continued up to the 8th century were deserted thereafter. Once flourished urban centers like Atranchi and Bitha in Uttar Pradesh, Ropar in Punjab, Iran in Madhya Pradesh, Prabhaspatan in Gujarat, Maheshwar and Ponar in Maharashtra, and Kudaveli in Andhra Pradesh fall in this category of urban settlements. Even the medieval greatness of Kanauj in the Farokhabad district of Uttar Pradesh, for which several wars were fought among the Pratiharas, Palas, and the Rashtrakutas, has settled to be testified by the archaeologists spared. During the Gupta period, sites such as Sangol, Hastinapura, Mathura, Atranjikhida, Sonk, Kosambi, Sarvasti, Chirand, Tamluk, etc. in the upper and middle Gangetic plains also witnessed a decline. Early towns such as Ujjain, Nagar, Pune, Ter, Nasik spread over Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, and Maharashtra also witnessed decay. We have an exciting amount of archaeological data that support the above mentioned contention. The archaeological evidences can be summed up in the following points. The habitational deposits of the 4th to 6th centuries at many urban centers are thinner as compared to those of the earlier centuries. The layers of the period under discussion display poor remains and lesser material remains. The Gupta layers at many sites indicate the reuse of bricks raw material from earlier sites. The spatial spread of the once flourishing sites witnessed contraction and are less in number. Objectives like stone beads, shells, ivory objects, and glass objectives are very inadequately found in post 5th century deposits. The pottery of this period is ordinary to coarse with no or little decoration. Many urban sites show a city-rial layer in the habitation deposit that belong to the 6th to 8th century CE period. These archaeological findings reveal that there is clear indication of desertion of urban centers in this period that finally led to urban decay. Now, we will be talking about currency. Coin scarcity during the post-Gupta period is proof of the reduction in trade. Gold coins, which had been so widely used during the Kushana and Gupta dynasties, ceased to exist after the 6th century. The absence of coinage made of copper and silver also attract attention. The gold content of Gupta gold coins was gradually declining, and by the time they were in their later stage, they had just half as much gold as Kushana coins did. The quantity of the coinage throughout the Gupta dynasty is also inferior to that of the early Christian eras. The epigraphic reference to currency from this era are of minimal relevance because there haven't been any significant findings. There are too much few coins from Harshvardhana, and most important, neither the Rashtrakutas nor the Palas, who became powerful in Bengal and Deccan in the 8th century, produced any coinage. There was no metallic money in the majority of northern India, Bengal, Orissa, central India, or the Deccan. South India shares the same faith as these regions. Numerous studies highlight practically total lack of coin molds and commercial sealing during the relevant time frame. Contrary, the general situation in other parts of the country up to until 1000 CE, the Punjab and the northwestern portion of subcontinent have produced several coins. Additionally, reports of currency discoveries have come from Kashmir. How were daily transitions handled if coins weren't used? In the lack of coinage during the period under study, what was the main form of exchange? Number of historians have tackled these issues. Some historians have maintained that older coins acted as cash in the later times and making the issuance of new coins unnecessarily. Although the agrarian expansion during the time under review was extraordinary, this alone would typically have required more metallic money. Additionally, coins represented sovereignty. No king would have voluntarily foregone the privilege of minting coins in his own name unless the compulsion were severe enough. Coins were no longer required as a result of the collapse in trade and the awarding of land to high ranking officials in place of cash payments. Additionally, there are evidences of barter and the use of cowries as a medium of exchange. Kapardikas have been discovered from a large number of archaeological sites as well. And in fact, the Chinese traveler Faiyan also tells us about the presence of them and how they were used in day-to-day trade and other exchanges. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding problems of urban decline, pattern of trade. Hope you have understood it well. See you next time with the same topic with some new dimensions of it. Till then, take care and goodbye.